Generally, the afternoon sessions don't start so early, but everybody is here. It's 2 o'clock, and it's one of the hot topics. I would like to introduce the panelists by name, and then we will be listening to their presentations. Gülüm Tanırcan is from Boğaziçi University, Kandilli Observatory Earthquake Research Institute. She studied in Japan on seismology, and she's now at Boğaziçi University. Kazım Gökhan Elgin is from Istanbul Governorship, and he is a coordinator. So we will listen to their projects about resilience. And Mahmut Bey is used to work in Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality on earthquakes. He worked for several years at Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality. We will listen to what they did. And Mustafa Erdik is from Turkey Earthquake Foundation, a professor. He worked in the field of earthquake for many years, and for AFAD, he is in the disaster relief group. We worked with him for a short while. Mr. Yoshiyuki Kaneda is from Kagawa University. He is the head consultant to the president and a professor. He is an expert in the field of seismology and disaster mitigation. I would like to thank and welcome all the participants. First, we will start with Gülüm Hoca. Our main topic is resilience of cities. Yes, the floor is yours. Should Professor Kaneda talk first? Well, okay, we discussed this, and you can go ahead. Distinguished participants, I would like to welcome you to the afternoon session. Before I get started, I would like to thank Marmara Union of Municipalities for this comprehensive meeting on this subject. I congratulate you and thank you for your invitation. Mehmet Bey introduced me briefly. I'm from Boğaziçi University, Kandilli Observatory. I'm a professor on seismology. Today, I prepared my presentation in Turkish, but I will speak in, I prepared it in English, but I will speak in Turkish. There's translation. I would like to talk about earthquake resilient cities from the perspective of earthquake engineering. I have two hats. One is earthquake engineering, and the other is, for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been coordinating the education center at Kandilli Observatory, and we try to raise awareness of the public. I have some experience about that, so I want to make some assessments around that as well. You see the content of this presentation. First, we will talk about coping earthquake, this concept. I would like to move from the global scale to the Istanbul scale. I will talk about the Hyogo framework for action, what's done there. Hyogo, after that, I want to talk about the Sendai framework. How did they cope with disasters? What are they doing now? That's what I want to talk about. And from the global scale, I'll move to the Turkey scales. What are the studies conducted so far? I want to summarize them. In fact, we have distinguished speakers who will also give a summary of that. And at Kandilli Observatory, what are some of the supportive projects? And I want to talk a bit about earthquake engineering, earthquake education. Based on my experience, I would like to talk about what we should do for the future, what are the challenges. I will be sharing my views on that. In fact, looking at this concept of resilience, what is it? That's what we need to look at. There are 10 different definitions in literature. When they asked me to give this presentation, I did some literature research and read scientific publications. You know, there are so many concepts here. If we're looking at the issue from the perspective of natural disasters, UNISDR has a formal definition. I want to read it in Turkish. The ability of a system, community, or society exposed to hazards to resist, absorb, accommodate, adapt to, transform, and recover from the effects of a hazard in a timely and efficient manner, including the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions. So, she is reading it in English as well. Resilience is related to capacity and coping capacity and resistance. Therefore, I actually met this in a lot of literature, and Mustafa Hoca will share the same perspective, I believe. Resilience is not just about resistance, actually. Resistance is one of the subcomponents of mitigation, and it doesn't really cover the concept of resilience completely, but it is just a part of that. Well, how can we define this briefly? The concept of earthquake resilience. It is the ability of an organization or community to quickly recover after a future large earthquake. It is not just a physical concept. It has social, economic, institutional, cultural, health, and a lot of other bodies in it. For instance, it's not just about design of architecture, but it has several other dimensions, so they should be tackled as a whole. They're equally important, in my opinion. For instance, if we're talking about some environmental structure, engineering is part of that. It is not just engineering. There's architecture, urban design, community planning, land use, modeling. So community planning, for instance, is one of the important aspects of this. But it's not just limited to those. There is the health aspect, social aspect, economic aspect as well. Let's look at things from a global perspective. I believe you have seen this yesterday and today's presentation. When it comes to mitigation, one of the important steps is taken between 2005 was the Hyogo Framework for Action between 2005 to 2015. It is adopted by 146 countries. As a result of this, there were some gaps that they found, and I try to summarize them under 3 headings. One is addressing the underlying disaster risk factors. One is the formulation of goals and priorities for action. And the third is the need to foster resilience. I actually highlighted it in red. The need to foster disaster resilience at all levels and ensuring adequate means of implementation. So, based on the lessons from here, a new framework was developed, Sendai Framework, covering 2015 to 2030. 187 countries adopted this, and nearly 100 countries have the focal points. There are 4 priorities here. The first one is understanding disaster risk. In order to manage disaster risk, governance should be strengthened. And in the third one, again marked with red, there's resilience, investing in disaster risk mitigation for resilience. And the fourth one is increasing the level of preparedness for effective response. And there was the slogan, Build Back Better, for recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Marked in orange, there is an interesting statistics here. The figures are surprising. It is a study by Odi in 2013. By 2030, there could be 325 million people trapped in poverty and exposed to the full range of natural hazards and climate extremes, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. For me, and I'm sure for you, this is an incredible number. It is definitely some number to be reduced. And the Sendai Framework Program, implementing it fully and properly is important for human life across the world. We know these, but I still wanted to summarize. It's very important for us to cope with earthquake, to save lives, to prevent injuries, to guard against social chaos, to preserve the economy, to protect affordable housing stock, to protect assets of building owners. These are very important and linked benefits. They're all linked to one another. There is another statistics that I want to focus on. It is a study conducted in the United States. The National Institute of Building Sciences conducted this research in 2018. If you have buildings constructed on the basis of the proper codes before an earthquake, the benefit-cost ratios is ranging from 4:1 up to 11.1. There is the average of 5 different disasters, and they came up with 11.1. But on the basis of earthquakes, it can go from 4:1 to even 12.1. So a $1 investment or 1 lira investment before the earthquake means you save 11 liras after the earthquake. So it has a contribution to the national economy. So I think this is one of the most important points in coping with disasters. I would like to talk about another topic here. There are some resilience-based design principles now. It is a terminology that I'm not very familiar with either. I'm learning. Our regulations, our modern earthquake regulations are not resilience-based because most of these regulations focus on saving lives, protecting lives. If there is a huge event, although it's based on those codes, as long as life safety performance is achieved, they allow certain limited damage to structural and non-structural components of buildings. But there is the financial cost of demolition, repair, and restoration of utilities. And these are not really taken into account. In 2013, in the United States, there was this new perspective that emerged. And it actually came from the companies, the high-rise buildings. A resilience-based design methodology considers the performance of buildings in terms of safety, damage, and recovery. So that's where the world of civil engineering is heading. As for Istanbul, you probably know these figures. There is more than 14 million people, and they generate more than 40% of the GDP. The city is under serious earthquake threat. The northern Anatolian fault line is nearby, and it hasn't been broken recently. If there is a huge earthquake, based on the Swiss Re figures, our total economic loss will be 90 to 120 billion US dollars, and 6.7 million people would be exposed to this earthquake. What have we done? In fact, our speakers will explain this in detail. It's the last 3 minutes. In the 1999 earthquakes, a lot has been done. I want to summarize some of this. There is the new seismic hazard map of Turkey, and the new building earthquake code was prepared. The UTSEP strategy started in 2012, and it's implemented successfully. The city hospitals were built with seismically isolated systems. It's compulsory and very important. There was the Safe Schools initiative, and the Turkish catastrophe insurance pool was established. It's compulsory again. And there was this urban renewal project. That's what started. There is a lot. Since my time is limited, I would like to talk about the resilient community section. In fact, I didn't put much underneath it. It starts with individual preparation and goes on with organizational preparation. There are several components under it, but personally, what I see is that in Turkey, unfortunately, people do not take individual responsibility. They don't ask these questions to themselves. Have you arranged your living space to be earthquake proof? Do you know what to do during and after an earthquake? Do you have insurance, etc.? So these are 3 simple questions. When you answer these 3 simple questions personally, at a personal level, you will have done a lot. And this is my perspective of the challenges regarding the future based on an earthquake engineering perspective. In general, in Turkey, we talk about earthquake resilient structures, and the structural inspection is understood only as inspection on site. The inspection goes on to the beginning to the end of the project, but in fact, engineering may not be part of this. Earthquake engineering is not part of this process. So earthquake engineering science should be demanded in these projects. In critical structures like high-rise buildings or critical infrastructures, there should be resilience-based designs that should be encouraged. In fact, a lot has been done in Turkey about that. In universities, this is studied at the the graduate level, and insurance is an important aspect. The level of insurance should increase in Turkey. I believe today 40% of homeowners have an earthquake insurance. This is very good. In China, there is an economic growth, but the rate of insurance is less than 5% even now. So compared to other countries, Turkey is ahead, but why not make it 90% or 100%? Thank you. If you have questions, you can download Maruf Android and iOS apps, and we will have time for Q&A in the last 15-20 minutes. Now we will make a slight change, and we will invite Mr. Yoshiyuki Kaneda. he has to leave early, so around 3:30, so we wanted to move his presentation ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I would like to many thanks for my invitation. Today, I would like to told the resilience society in Turkey and Japan. The subtitle is based on the research of the Marmara team and Nankai Trough project. So. Yes, as you know, this is 20 years ago. This is the Izmit earthquake. And the same years, the destructive earthquake in Taiwan. So 1 month ago, I went to Taiwan, the same 20 years memorial meeting. Yes. Okay. I'd like to recommend disaster mitigation science. It's including the science, medical science, and engineering, and social science. Totally, as a multidisciplinary science, it is very, very important for against the destructive disaster. So this is. Okay, disaster mitigation science is the multidisciplinary science for the preparedness, awareness, and preliminary the reconstruction plan, and education and technology, and the disaster coping, as Dr. Gülüm mentioned, and the recovery, resilience, and finally, bright future. This is very, very important. Okay. Back. Oh. Okay, all right. Just a moment. Yes. Little bit, just a moment. Okay, from now, I would like to explain the SATREPS project. It's already calculated at 2030 to 2017. So this is a Marudin project, including the observational research and engineering research and scenario research, and finally the education outreach researches. This is very important project for the Turkey and Japan. So this is one of the scenario, the model setting or earthquake cycle scenario. Based on this Marudin result, we already developed a recurrence cycle of the North Anatolian fault earthquake. It's just one of the scenario. This is one of the scenario. At first, this is a first break is broken from the east part, and the next in the west part. It's just a scenario. However, we have to develop more precise scenario based on the observational researches. It's very, very important. So. Next slide is a disaster prevention activity in Japan. Many Japanese understand Nankai Trough megathrust earthquake, probably maximum magnitude is 9. It's very, very huge earthquake and huge tsunamis. And the Metropolitan earthquake, it's like a Marmara earthquake in Tokyo, around Tokyo. So, however, many Japanese people understand, but they understand it's very difficult to prediction more detail. Time, date, week, it's very, very difficult. However, we have to prepare the many prevention goods, for instance, and the water, food, writing, something else. It's very, very important. Probably almost in each Japanese houses, we already prepared. It's very, very important. And now we are prepared disaster prevention goods such as water. Yes, I already mentioned. So they confirm the evacuation place. So in Japan, many evacuation places already municipalities set up, and just private evacuation buildings and private evacuation place is already prepared. It's very, very important. Then finally, in Japan, we already developed a BCP. business continuity program and DCP, district continuity program. It's very, very important, not only at disaster, just before and after. It's very, very important. It's just a continuity program. So this is, for instance, self-help, mutual assistance is very, very important and dispensable. So I would like to show the mark of the shelter of the evacuation place. If you stay in Japan, you can see the many signs of the evacuation building sign, evacuation place sign, and the tsunami evacuation place. It's very, very important if occur earthquake and tsunamis. So I would like to recommend that in Turkey, such signs more prepared and developed. It's very, very important for the public people. This is, I would like to show you some recurrent cycle simulation and the Nankai trough. Sometimes occurred magnitude 8 class earthquake, sometimes occurred magnitude 9 earthquake, and sometimes between 8 to 9. It's just a supercomputer earthquake, no damages. So what we can see is some kind of the pattern of the, sometimes the earthquake from eastern part, and sometimes earthquake from western part. It's very, very important. It's just a simulation result, but we have to prepare and we have to develop the more precise these recurrent cycle simulation with observational data. It's similar to the North San Antonio fault recurrent cycle simulation. So, and I would like to show you the real-time monitoring system. It's ocean floor network system. The DoNet2, now we just under constructing NNet, which covered Nankai trough seismogenic zone. If occurred the earthquake and tsunamis, we can detect earthquake tsunami as soon as very early. And we have to monitor the cluster deformation, seismicity and ocean floor deformation data using this network. This is very, very important. This is an example of the DoNet. It's already deployed 51 observatory around the eastern part of the Nankai trough seismogenic zone. Oh, sorry. I'm back. Yes. Just a moment. Okay. This is some simulation. If occurred earthquake, the western part, eastern part is ruptured, and how to propagate a rupture to western part. And some right side is a magnitude 9 earthquake occurred. How to trigger the megathrust earthquake? It's just an example of the simulation. It's very important. This is just a simulation combined to the real-time data by the DoNet1 and the DoNet2 and the NNet. It's very, very important. Finally, we precise the more reliable simulation in the near future. Oh, little bit. Oh, it's okay. Oh, just a moment.
Sensörümüz nerede arkadaşlar? Nerede tutuyoruz? Ekipten kimse yok galiba.
Okay. Again. This is in the Marudin project. We carried out the tsunami simulation and estimate the tsunami risk hazard. So this is a vulnerability from the tsunami evacuation. It depends on the tsunami height, inundation area, and the topography. If the very steep topography, it's difficult to evacuate from tsunamis. It's just an example. And I would like to show you some example experience. This is a 30 centimeter tsunami height. You can see. We can easy to move. It's a 30 centimeter, not 1 meter, not 2 meter. It's very, very important. How to dangerous the tsunamis we can understand. This is they improved seismic response based on the precise solid survey. It's very, very important and applied to the advanced numerical simulation. We just the example of the they improved the seismic hazard map. It's just an example. Includes the more precise building information. Next slide. It's not only earthquake damage, it's a kind of the oil tank fire. It's a very, very severe problem in Japan, in Turkey. Yes. I would like to show some experiment using the large shaking table. Just a moment. Yes, moving. Many times I show you the in Turkish conference. Yes, this is real scale buildings. Okay, you can see more later. Just a moment. Now we zoom in here. It takes a time. Just a moment. By the way, I stayed in the last week. I stayed in the Kocaeli. I felt the earthquake. Yes, the some chandelier is moving. Yes, this is just non-protect of the furniture down. This is the true experiment data. Okay, you can see, if you have no protection, it is a real result, okay? Okay.
What's the magnitude?
Magnitude about, I think that this is a Kobe earthquake, magnitude 7.3, probably, yes. Okay, I have not enough time, so
yeah,
quickly.
3 minutes.
2 minutes. And yes, at the Kumamoto earthquake, 2060, the damage of the city hall is a very severe problem. If the city hall is damaged, disaster coping is quite difficult. And this is a shelter map in Nagoya. In Japan, many municipality area, we already set up the shelter. It's like here, okay? Some map. This is this is a this is the shelter map. Yes, example. This is the true shelter at disaster.
No. Bir mikrofon alabilir miyiz arkadaşlar?
Again, is it okay?
No.
Can we please get a microphone?
This is a true photo. Yes, many people evacuate and keep the private the water wall, the paper wall. Yes, this is just a true shelter disaster. This is our final BCP, DCP as indispensable. As I mentioned, BCP is a business continuity program, and DCP is a district continuity program. It's very, very important. However, okay. However, the PCP, I make the new words. PCP is a personal continuity program to save yourself. And FCP, family continuity program, to save family. It's very, very important. And CCP, as Gülüm mentioned, a community continuity program is very, very important. Finally, more large, as AFAD had charge of the national continuity program. Yes, very, very important, I think so. So this is a disaster prevention expert, self-help and mutual assistance and cooperation is very, very important. And disaster mitigation, again, I said, science, medical, and engineering, and social science as a disciplinary science is very, very important for disaster disaster mitigation and for a resilient society. This is I would like to. Finally, the human resource cultivation is very, very important. So, and I would like to close my talk. International collaboration is very, very important and indispensable, especially between Turkey and Japan. It's very, very important. I think so. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kaneda'ya çok teşekkür ediyoruz.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to move on to our third speaker, Kazım Gürkan Ergin Bey. He's going to talk to us about resilient cities, resistant cities. Actually, I should say resilient rather than resistant. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you and Marmara Union of Municipalities for preparing such an important event, for organizing such an important event. I would like to talk to you about our project, ISMEP, Seismic Risk Mitigation and Emergency Preparedness Project. I would like to give you some brief information about our project. This is not working, I guess. Okay. Turkey is a country of natural disasters, as we all know. You can see some photos after the earthquake, Marmara earthquake in 1999. You can see a railway from Gölcük, a bridge that collapsed in Sakarya. Because of that bridge, transport was not possible between Istanbul and Ankara, so this had a lot of consequences in the aftermath of earthquake. Tüpraş was not able to produce electricity because of a fire. You can see another collapsed building. You can see some photos of floods. You can see a photo from Üsküdar. Unfortunately, we see a lot of these photos these days because we have a lot of settlements. We do not have empty land anymore. That's why we have an increasing number of such incidents. And on the bottom right, you can see a photo from 2010, a highway. There was a flood and we had lost 30 citizens because of that incident. We have land erosions, landslides, forest fires, but earthquakes constitute 97.1% of life losses in Turkey because of natural disasters. This graph is showing us the effect of natural disasters on sustainable development. Green line represents the least developed and developing countries. Natural disasters affect the economy negatively, but the developed countries, they are not that much affected. And we can see the effects of natural disasters over the years. We can see that the developing countries are very much affected by natural disasters. We had two earthquakes in 1999, one in Gölcük and one in Düzce. There were a lot of life loss after these earthquakes, and we had taken some lessons. We were not able to communicate for 48 hours. We had out of standard buildings that collapsed because we were not sensitive to earthquakes. Our infrastructure was damaged, even the public buildings were damaged. When it came to first aid and rescue efforts, there was a difficult bureaucracy, logistic insufficiencies, and the economic loss was $13 billion, which constituted 5 to 7% of our national income. income. So 1 year of growth can be prevented because of such natural disasters. And then there were some policy changes that were introduced. Before we used to say it was fate. It's still fate actually. We don't know when it is going to happen, how it's going to happen, but we know where the fault line is. We know where the flooding will be. So if you build your buildings there, and if your building is not in line with the standards, it means that it's not fate, it's your choice. So we cannot just say that it's fate. I worked in the project implementation unit of the Prime Ministry. There were a lot of work on house building. We were reactionaries back then, but now we are working proactively with this project, ISMEP project. So we are trying to contribute to sustainable development in this field. Now, in our country, we have development plans aiming 5-year periods, and we are trying to come up with strategies. The first step when it comes to this strategy concerns Istanbul. As you know, Istanbul has a population of 14.6 million. It's the biggest city of Istanbul. It is the center of tourism, commerce, and industry. It contributes by 27.2% to national income. It is one of the 3 cities with the highest level of earthquake risk in the world, and the economic loss would be great in terms of in Istanbul in case of an earthquake. So the Istanbul Project Coordination Unit was founded. I am the founding director of that unit. We are supported by the World Bank, European Investment Bank, European Council Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, and German Development Bank. The budget of the project is $2 billion. How do we define ourselves? We ask this question ourselves very much. What is IPCU? IPCU operates under the Governor's Office of Istanbul. It's out of the general budget. It uses the funds of international credit organizations, and it carries out preparedness efforts. We have a steering committee. It is presided by the Istanbul Governor's Office, the Ministries of Environment and Ministries of Treasury, and the Prime Ministry's Disaster Management Unit also. They are also a member of this committee. Every year we hold our steering committee once or twice a year actually. We evaluate the development of the project, we evaluate the challenges that we have. One of the decisions that we take there, if we need reinforcement and if the reinforcement costs is more than 40% of the rebuilding costs, then we rebuild the buildings rather than reinforcement studies. We have to we need capacity building for emergency preparedness to mitigate the risk, and we have to have effective implementation of building regulations. We have a lot of stakeholders. We have around 25 stakeholders with which we work. And let's take a look at projects that we implement. We increase the emergency preparedness capacity. Our moderator would know this very well. Before we had antennas like you see on the left. Now we build towers. We use microwave links and satellite communication systems. We also have these white areas. The radio system did not work before our work, but now we increased the capacity, and now, as you can see, all the areas are green and our radios work. If there is a problem with the communication, we are going to have mobile communication vehicles. And if there's a problem with communication, we're going to use these vehicles. We also have rescue, search and rescue work. We built 2 command center for that. Our priority is public buildings, hospitals, schools, and social services buildings, such as dormitories and administrative buildings. We reinforce and rebuild such buildings. So far, we have reinforced 85% of public buildings. We reinforced and rebuilt 95% of schools. 1,147 school buildings were reinforced. There are a lot of students and teachers inside these schools. We rebuilt some schools. These schools are environmental friendly, they're modern, we pay attention to that. We try to build schools that do not require a lot of maintenance activities. I would like to share a few examples with you. When we demolish and rebuild buildings, we also consider the needs of Istanbul. For example, we increase the capacity of classrooms and we increase the number of students that receive education there. We have 18 hospitals and 61 polyclinics where we carry out reinforcement activities. In Ümraniye, we built a gynecology hospital, and in Ok Meydanı we also built a hospital on 259,000 square meters with 1,099 beds. I am going to show you a few more hospitals. These hospitals are going to provide uninterrupted services in case of an earthquake. We have also green hospitals. These hospitals were designed in a way that would receive a LEED certificate. Ok Meydanı Hospital is one of the biggest hospitals in Istanbul. It can have 700,000 patients in emergency situations. We couldn't close this hospital in order to rebuild it, so we are doing it stage by stage. You can see 80% of our construction work here. When we complete this construction, the old building will move here, so the remaining 20% will be used for landscaping. And now you can see the final version of the hospital. We are using some seismic isolators. Actually, we have used 305 seismic isolators for this hospital. And this was very important for us because we want this hospital to be able to work and function in the aftermath of a possible earthquake. This is the main entrance of the hospital. These are our rooms. Even if the rooms are occupied by one patient at this moment, 2 patients can use the room in case of an emergency as well. But there's a problem with my pointer. It's not working very well. This is a photo of our hospital in Kartal. This was handed over to the Ministry of Health. There is 1,150 beds in it. The administrative building is already operational. Polyclinics are already operational. At the moment, we are transferring the old building to the new one. So I believe as of the end of October, the Kartal Hospital will be transferred altogether. So we are going to be rid of a hospital that has earthquake risks. This is the Göztepe Hospital. It is also being built stage by stage. When the first stage is completed, we're going to start the second stage. Marmara Research Hospital has been reinforced with seismic isolators too. Maybe another colleague will give you some details. All curtains, steel curtains were cut out, and the hospital was reinforced with seismic isolators. We have administrative buildings which we reinforced too. 54 administrative campuses were reinforced or rebuilt. This is Atatürk dormitory for students. When it comes to cultural and historical legacies, we carried out some inventory work in 176 buildings. We wanted to see how risky they were, and for some of them we did reinforcement work. Mecidiye Palace was reinforced. Actually, the process is still ongoing. We saw a gap here, actually, because there were no guidelines, no regulations in this field. So we worked with the Ministry of Tourism and the General Directorate of Foundations, and they worked together, and they published a they published guidelines, a set of guidelines. But our work does not end here. It is very important to reinforce these buildings. We also worked with Bağcılar and Pendik pilot municipalities. We wanted to have more effective zoning and building permission processes. All archives were digitalized. We established hotlines. We wanted to include the public, include the people, so that the processes could continue more transparently. Now the process is down to 10 days rather than 100 days. People are quite happy with the process as well. We have educational materials. AFAD is leading the way in this sense, and we are happy to support them in all their efforts. Here you can see the number of people we've reached. We also receive a lot of foreign delegations, international delegations, in order to examine our project, because this is a very well-known project in the world. This is one of the biggest risk mitigation projects in the world, so we go to international conferences to share our knowledge. Now, I touched upon social and technical aspects. We also have the economic aspect. We carried out an economic impact analysis. We wanted to see what's the economic consequence will be after the earthquake. So we looked at different components, life loss, economic loss, etc. If we have an earthquake, if it's at night, it is going to cost us 7.3 liras for liras of cost. But if it's during the day, the cost will go up. This is what we observed. Thank you very much for your attention. I would like to thank you for your presentation and for what you do for Istanbul. Now I would like to invite Mahmut Baş for his speech. He is the director of earthquake and soil analysis in Eskişehir. He worked in Istanbul before. Hello everyone. Today I will be talking to you about some studies that will maybe frighten you, maybe please you. Disaster prevention and risk management studies. Over the past 25 years, what have we achieved? Where have we failed? I will be talking about these issues, if this pointer allows me, of course. Now, as you know, when we take a look at the activities of fault lines in Turkey, Marmara and Istanbul have always been subjected to earthquakes of different magnitudes. The final one was an earthquake of 5.7 magnitude. I would like to touch upon the relationship between cities and natural disasters. As you know, unplanned structures and buildings pave the way for the damage in case of an earthquake. The zoning plans and the postponement of plans, they cause a lot of damage. We turn our city into a land of waste, actually, and a land of concrete. What's important is to have a legal basis, but this is more than a legal problem. This is a moral problem, and unless we solve this moral problem, we will continue to die in the end.
There is a saying in the Holy Bible: we are creating lies, and at the end of the day, we will be falling into the wells that we are digging, and evil will have landed upon us. And there is the saying of the Indians to the white man: one day you will be drowned in your own trash. Before we get drowned in our own trash, we have to get rid of these structures. And there are disaster prevention principles. I will talk about what's going on in Istanbul. We know all the dangers in Istanbul. There are meteorological and geological two threats. One is earthquake, the other is flooding because of rainfall, and maybe tsunami that will come with the earthquake. And within the framework of Istanbul, all the risks have been identified, and there is the strategy to complete the earthquake risks, and there are some macro level strategies, and they're identified by the central administration, and there are medium level strategies that are actually created with the central administration, with other local governments, and then there are some micro practices that we need to switch to immediately. One of the main problems is the financing of the disasters. The revenue distribution and risk profiles do not match, so it's not just about passing laws, it's not just about getting loans. It's difficult to overcome these. So in 2002-2003, we conducted a master plan with 4 universities, and we have proposed 2 financing models. The United Nations Risk Mitigation International Strategic Document outlines the measures, and it's just not limited to the post-earthquake period. And there is a focus on the pre-earthquake period, and risks are taken into account in all the plans. And the Metropolitan Municipality has been focusing on that particularly. 1 unit of expense prevents 7 units of loss, 1 lira versus 7 liras. It's much more valuable. So risk mitigation expense is an investment. It is not a cost. Well, after this, I would like to talk about the Directorate of Earthquakes. I was the founding director. There are some studies that we conducted. That's what I'd like to talk about. Mustafa Erdik, our professor here, has a lot of contribution and has so much to contribute. So I would like to, had so much to contribute, so I want to thank him. Now, the main goal is not saving people from under the rubbles, but to prevent people going under the rubbles. And in Istanbul, in Tokyo and Los Angeles, there are several projects going on, and they are also conducted for Istanbul. The only difference is that they're not implemented in Turkey, whereas they're implemented in the other cities. I want to talk about the risk mitigation work. There are 10 main headings, and 7 of them are conducted by Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality Earthquake Department. I will talk about them one by one. Istanbul City Geology and Microregioning work. It is cell-based. It is for identifying meteorological and geological threats, identifying risks for liquefaction, tremors, engineering geology, and so on. So any study to be conducted after this, we can say that if there is a study that there is not more scientific, then you don't need to conduct any study. So there are these geological, geomorphological, geophysical maps of Istanbul, and we have completed all these mapping for Istanbul. We have created this location information system with several public institutions. Well, I think that the map on the left, this shows the work done from 1960s to 1980 to 1990s. Different scientists and institutions conducted different studies. Finally, in 2016, there were some geological, geophysical, geomorphological studies. It was run by TÜBİTAK. There were 2,800 buildings there on active fault lines. So, when we look at the next map, as I said, geology, science, geophysics, geomorphology, those sciences are rendered ineffective because of certain practices. In the past, the fault lines were being postponed with some decisions of the city council. Now, in this region, they are actually eliminating landslides with the decision of engineering. It used to be the ministry that stopped this, and now it's the ministry that approves of these. Cemil Meriç has a saying: we are fighting with words, and we are putting forth lies and facts as signs, and the only result is worshipping wrongs. So everything is legal here. All the work is legal, but it's missing science. It's not matching the principles of science. There is the Istanbul earthquake loss and damage analyses. We started with the Japanese before, and with Mustafa, Professor Mustafa. If there is a 7.5 magnitude earthquake in Istanbul, what will happen? What kind of damage? We measure this on the basis of units. There will be 1 in 1,000 loss of lives in case of such an earthquake. And there is the Istanbul tsunami danger analysis. The highest wave in the shores will reach 6 meters, and it will be 8 minutes to reach the shore, and the highest wave will reach the Anatolian coastal line of 10 kilometers. There are 17 districts to be affected by that. How far will the waves go? How many buildings will be affected? We know these, and we will start the mitigation process for tsunami in Istanbul. We also have the master plan prepared with 4 universities. It is prepared with 4 universities, but knowledge is a huge source of power, but when you don't use it, it's a big burden on your shoulders. And Istanbul earthquake master plan is a big burden on our shoulders because it is not implemented. So there were all these studies for risks and threats so far, and there is a study that crystallizes all that, Istanbul Disaster Risk Indication System, and it is also one of the main challenges in urban transformation. There is political service, and then there is resistance, and there are some legal objections. This is developed so that this is all at a minimal level. It is a study that has national and international awards. And there are some earthquake loss estimation projection models. And in order to reduce the risks, this is a very important roadmap, actually the most important roadmap. Well, I've spent my minutes, so I will ask for a little more time. The temporary shelter need during earthquakes, it is something that can be resolved in 3 minutes, but it's on the agenda for the last 7 days. And it's because our bureaucrats are not informing some politicians properly. And our media has to access the right information. This has been on the agenda for 1 year. It's something that can be solved in 3 minutes, but it's turned into a matter of fight and conflict. And there are 1 million people who will require relief operations, and 640 houses will need temporary shelter. Sorry, 640,000 households will need temporary shelter. And there is another important study that's been going on since 2008, but it is not implemented. There is the Center for Prevention and Education. It is to raise awareness, education through entertainment as well. It is a simulation study that is actually in every province of Japan, more or less. And it is to actually raise awareness of people against such disasters. And I'm hoping that the new staff will implement this. Well, this is what I request from the guests here. There are some questions that you need to ask the administrators, both at the local and central level. If you like, we can go on from there. Now, there are some studies in Istanbul, some scientific studies. We will lose 15 million people. Sorry, he said 15 million, but it says 15,000 on the screen. So, and 40,000 people will need to be treated in hospitals, and 75,000 people will be mildly injured. And there will be about 120 to 150 billion Turkish liras of total financial loss. About 200,000 buildings will not be usable anymore. At the end of 5 years, which strategy and projects are there to meet those losses, to reduce the number of the injuries or losses? In Istanbul, there are 85,000 natural gas boxes, and we're expecting damage. If 10% ended up with a fire, that would mean fire in a very broad area, and our fire brigade does not have this kind of capacity. At the end of 5 years, which strategies and projects will you have to reduce this? Please ask these questions and their answers. Of course, rescue and relief operations are important, but it's more important what you do so that there is no person under the rubbles. Which projects are you planning? You have to face scientific facts, or you will just stay in the comfort zone and remain under the rubble. My concrete suggestion. Mahmut Bey, you had been the director of earthquake for 20 years. Well, I have the answer to that question. Sorry, we cannot hear this Val because there is no microphone. Well, there will be room for questions. There is a big earthquake risk in Istanbul. In order to manage this, these are our recommendations. We have been saying this for 20 years, and I'll explain why it was not implemented. Instead of fighting disaster, it's important to eliminate the risks that lead to these disasters. Being ready for disaster means having these organizations for tent and relief process. So rather than saving people from the rubble, it's important to stop them from being left under the rubble. And in order to be least affected from disasters, instead of an emergency management, it's important to have a risk management approach together with all the institutions. Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality has created a unit for an integrated approach. So a resilient Istanbul program has to be created. The actions should be set up. The final word is, as long as we do not take actions, in the future there won't be need for doing anything because the earthquake will have done its damage. So we need to have this mass movement. We have to turn this chaos into a symphony. Thank you. Thank you very much. After all these valuable presentations, as a last speaker, I would like to outline some main points. Well, I will talk about this resilience term. It comes from the Latin word resiliere. It's leaping back up, so it has nothing to do with resistance. And I think coping is the right term. Gülüm used this partially, but this is what we have to do because otherwise the translation resistance wouldn't be very appropriate. Gülüm talked about Sendai. Indeed, this resilience work started with Sendai. There was a campaign, the Resilient Cities campaign, that was initiated in 2010-2011. It is necessary to come up with coordination of all the units. There should be financial opportunities to reduce the urban risks. All the health facilities and schools, safety levels should be reinforced. There should be education programs to reduce risks. The urban ecosystems and natural buffer zones should be protected. There should be emergency management capacity and early alarm systems developed, and the shelter and life needs should be met. These were all explained item by item. We have heard about the practices about those before. In fact, there are some studies going on in Turkey. 3 years ago, Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality started an important project. They created the master plan. Unfortunately, the master plan was not very popular. It wasn't announced, but last year, particularly in Istanbul, in order to increase resilience, they started a new project. It's still going on. It's not completed. The goal is to increase the resilience, the coping mechanism, addressing the issue from all perspectives, making this visible, increasing the awareness of stakeholders. And resilience means all the functions of the city can be sustained in front of possible and unforeseen or current functions. So going back to the normal life as soon as possible means you are resilient. What is the theoretical framework? There are different functions here. Engineering function is one, hydrology is one, ecology is one. So it's not just about the increasing the resilience of buildings, it's just one aspect. A lot of aspects should work together. Only then a city can cope with the earthquake. Well, there are different resilience models developed. One of them is this resilient cities model, and the other one is the one established by UN Habitat. There is information on the websites and in municipalities. I don't want to go into details because we have limited time. One of the most important things is the disaster resilience scorecard for cities. It started in 2017 by UNISDR, organized for coping with disasters, define the risk scenarios, enhance financial capacity for coping, plan for urban development or planning, know and protect the natural structure that prevents disasters, enhance the capacity of institutions, understand and reinforce social capacity, increase the resilience of infrastructure, and increase the quality of construction compared to before the disaster. Of course, it's not a radical increase, but even a relative increase is important. About Istanbul, there are some unique features. That is the urgent food and shelter needs after the earthquake, planning emergency health services after the earthquake, the hospitals, and some pre-earthquake planning for the city after the earthquake. How will the zoning plan be after the earthquake? If you don't have it beforehand, you can't immediately put it into effect afterwards. And there is need to develop some tools that are in line with the legal, administrative, financial models and the current social and economic realities. And it's very important to ensure there is healthy drinking water. And the finance system is being moved to Istanbul, and if the financial functions do not work, it will be a disaster too. So there should be planning so that the financial markets are normalized. And insurance, it should be widespread, especially for SMEs. So these are the special elements for Istanbul. Now going to more specific issues. The main element of increasing the resilience capacity is mitigating the earthquake risk. This is something that we know very well. I'm not going to go into the details. We have to identify the earthquake threat and risk. We shouldn't increase the current risk. Third, we should increase the current risk. And fourth, we have to transfer risk. And in terms of identifying risk, our colleagues talked about that. If you take Tokyo and San Francisco, Turkey is at the same level. I mean, there is nothing that we don't know compared to those cities. And not increasing the current risk. Well, you have to implement the zoning plan so that the current risk doesn't increase, and the regulations should be passed properly. And where are we the weakest? Well, mitigating current risk. I've written this in red. There is insufficient infrastructure, so there's need to improve the earthquake performance. And risk transfer is another thing. We're very good when it comes to risk transfer issue. And the earthquake risk transfer is, of course, about the earthquake insurance. The payment capacity of this insurance is about 16 billion Turkish liras. Current penetration is 63%. Compared to Tokyo and San Francisco too, it is very successful. It's important to include SMEs to this insurance coverage. They're currently out of this, and task is not fully compulsory, it's semi-compulsory, but it is necessary to develop the voluntary insurance, so we have to see some work there as well. In mitigating the current risk, one of the important issues is improving the transportation infrastructure, especially bridges, viaducts, tunnels, highways. There is no problem about that in Turkey. The transportation infrastructure in Istanbul is very strong. It's like a developed country and maybe even better. But the same is not true for other infrastructure, especially not for the industrial facilities. We have room to cover for that. There is a significant improvement in the earthquake performance of buildings after 2000. The public is more aware now. There is an inspection system. Engineers are trained better. There is this new specs. And after 2000, the inflation rate went down and the big companies could reach capital. So it's not the build and sell, but the big companies went into the picture. These are important aspects. And they talked about the ISMEP project, the project to reduce seismic risk. And there are some very good improvements there. And for urban transformation, it just started in Turkey. There are some different plans of our government. We're talking about 300,000 households in Istanbul. But based on our current experience, they need to be revised and they need to be sustained, because if with the current system, it's not really sustainable. And our municipality has a master plan. It's an important source. And it's important to have some incentives and some deterring measures. Some of them may be things that you are hearing for the first time, but it's very difficult to do everything by laws. We have to have some incentives and disincentives. One is the earthquake performance rating system. In the US, there is this Resilience Society. It's been going on for 4 years. It is an NGO. There are Italians and New Zealand that are also partners. And they are actually rating the earthquake performance of buildings from platinum to compatible. There are 4 items: platinum, gold, silver, and compatible. It is about the earthquake performance of the building. So what's the benefit of bringing this kind of system, especially in private schools and private hospitals? When it's the platinum rating, the other private schools will try to take that too, and they will have to reinforce their current structure as a result of that. What does this look like? the leadership. There are different levels. There is LEED Gold in our hospitals, which is great, but these hospitals will get the Platinum level in earthquake performance, but it's important to encourage our public and other institutions for the same. In terms of earthquake performance too, it's necessary to have these kinds of ratings. I don't want to go into the details, but the Turkish Earthquake Foundation has a lot of work together with other groups, and we hope that we will talk with our government and put it into effect.
Another important issue: compulsory earthquake insurance against third persons. God forbid, if there was an earthquake today, if people got injured in a shopping mall, if they lost their lives, the compensation would be settled in courts, and that would take like 5 or 6 years. But in the world today, such institutions, such people can get earthquake financial obligation insurance. This is a very important kind of insurance, and it does not only protect you against earthquakes, against other incidents as well. You're protected. If a piece of rock falls onto your head when you walk on streets, you can be protected thanks to this kind of insurance. In 1959, there was a law that was enacted, and this provided a protection for third persons. The text is in Arabic, I mean full of Arabic terms and Ottoman terms, but if you look at the bottom, you can see that you are also protected against earthquakes. So such regulations would be helpful. Getting protection with an insurance in that way is very important. I am out of my time, but I have to touch upon one final issue. This is a very important project with a lot of value added. Istanbul has the most important museums in the world, the most important collections in the world. So collections, they stand like this, as you can see on the screen. With a smallest earthquake, we would get a lot of damage, so we have to protect them too. Museums should be insured as well. This is all I have to say. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, distinguished professor. We are going to take some questions for 10 or 15 minutes. We will very quickly take questions. First of all, I would like to start with you, distinguished professor, and then we will move on with other questions. Some professors, they demand undersea warning system investment. Do you see that kind of an investment coming? Microphone, please. His microphone is off. Translators cannot hear the speaker. It is very difficult for me to make an evaluation for only this, but if we include other topics, we need to strengthen the walls in Istanbul, the castle walls in Istanbul, or we need to reinforce certain public buildings. I would give the priority to these issues. I wouldn't give priority to underground warning system, but I cannot make an absolute evaluation. By the way, just to give you a piece of information, AFAD has deep well stations that they operate with other institutions. We can get earthquake data thanks to these wells, but it's not a warning system. Yes, as I said in my speech, we have no shortcomings when it comes to geology or other kinds of data. Thank you very much, distinguished professor. When there's a lot of old buildings, people cannot renew their buildings because of the zoning conflicts. Maybe we can ask this question to Mahmut Bey. Is there such a study to solve this problem? District and metropolitan municipalities, you can go to them, you can make a written application, and you can get information from them. So district municipalities are where to go. Yes. You ask a question to me and Mahmut Bey. Here is the question. After disasters, what kind of solutions, what kind of investments do we make for water and sanitation problems? What kind of solutions and investments for water and sanitation problems? My area of expertise is for before the earthquake, for mitigating the risks before earthquakes. It does not include floods, inundations, or does not cover İSKİ, the Istanbul Water and Sewerage Administration. I am an expert on what kind of damage there will be when there's an earthquake, but as for this question, you can get information from the Disaster Coordination Center, the Governor's Office of Istanbul. You can get this information from them. I can answer my part of the question. As AFAD, for before the earthquake, after the earthquake, and during the earthquake, we are not the only implementer of activities. Ever since AFAD was founded, it has been positioned as a coordination mechanism. There is an institution such as the SEİ, the State Water Affairs, and İSKİ, Istanbul Water and Sewerage Administration. We have all these institutions, so AFAD cannot assume the responsibility all alone, but AFAD coordinates with these institutions. At the moment, we are taking measures with İSKİ about how to solve this problem. We take a look at what our capacity is, what is the possible needs we are going to have. And we are looking at Istanbul's capacity and the national capacity. We get contributions from the state water affairs. We are trying to solve water, sanitation, and other needs in this way. So we need a collective approach here, not an approach conducted by one single institution. We are talking about resistance here. We are talking about what we have to do before an earthquake. This categorization can be confused very easily. Are we ready for response after the earthquake? And questions related to before the earthquake resilience are different questions, but the most important part is risk mitigation and resilience part to reduce the damage. What have we done so far? What have we done for the past 20 years? Actually, almost all of our professors, they have touched upon different issues. Professor Mustafa categorized it very successfully. He talked about risk, he talked about landslide maps, he talked about regulations. He talked about the prevention of the risk increase, which means that new buildings, they should not be non-resistant to earthquakes. So there were new regulations that were enacted not long ago. My professors would know this better than me. When you change the use of iron, you can increase the strength of a building by 2 folds. When you change the quality of your concrete, when you change the architecture, you change a lot. Actually, there are 14 articles in the new regulations. I'm not going to go into details, but we have the articles and regulations ready. And when it comes to insurances, I am also an expert on DASK, on the compulsory earthquake insurance. A lot of progress has been made. Istanbul's general performance is quite good. It's 65% now, but we have to increase it to 85 to 90%. And the percentage in the entire country is more than 60%, but we have to increase it. Why? Because resilience includes financial, individual, building resilience. There are many subcomponents of it. In 20 years, we have covered a lot of way, a lot of progress, but we have shortcomings. We have to mitigate more risks. But I would like to repeat here, last week we had an earthquake of 5.8 magnitude. This is not a new phenomenon. This was a reality. We talk about it all the time when we have meetings with our professors here. What we need to have is resilient buildings, but this resilience approach is very important. This has always been a reality and it will continue to be that. I don't want to take up further of your time. Now, another question. Collective measures, how are they tackled by different institutions? I would like to summarize Kandilli Observatory House's studies here in order to answer this question. In order to mitigate the danger of earthquake in Turkey, the effort started with the earthquake in 1999. That earthquake showed us that we are not educated. We have a low level of awareness. So we started training modules, training programs with the support of international organizations. Bosphorus University Kandilli Observatory House led the way. It was a long-term project actually. Within the scope of this project, children, adults, professionals, people with disabilities, they all received different training programs, various training programs which were supported with books and materials. They got to understand the earthquake better. They got to understand how they were supposed to behave in case of an earthquake. So many materials, training materials were prepared. At the moment, this project is finished and the results are being shared with the public. We have an earthquake park within our unit. Every week, around 200 to 250 children are taken from their schools and they visit Kandilli free of charge. They can see the right implementations right in the field. They test it actually. We had a 5-year project, Mardin project, that we completed last year. We carried out some tsunami work as well. We developed some training materials, awareness materials in that field. After 1999, all of these materials were used by ISMEP project, by AFAD as well. So we use the same training materials. If you'll allow me, I would like to say that this work belongs to AFAD organization. We started this work in 2007. We started working on the materials in 2007. There was some scattered work back then, but when AFAD organization was founded, this scattered information was gathered under one single roof. We scanned the world literature. We combined all of them. We combined them with our local materials. Now we have a consensus on a chain of materials. We just need to make it more widespread. I have another question for you. In case of an earthquake in Istanbul, can service continue in Kartal, Okmeydanı hospitals? But there's only one hospital that will be active on the European side, so how sufficient it will be? How sufficient will it be? It's not only up to ISMEP to build these hospitals. There are other institutions that are responsible for it. Bakırköy Sadi Konuk Hospital was built after the earthquake. Bahçelievler Hospital was also built after the earthquake. Mehmet Akif Ersoy Hospital was also built after the earthquake. These are all hospitals that were built in line with the regulation that was enacted after the earthquake. But what is important for us is to repair or mitigate the risk of buildings that are risky, that are considered as risky. This is why we focused on Okmeydan Hospital on the European side and Kartal and Göztepe hospitals on the Asian side, but there are other hospitals. Okay, let's take 2 more questions and then we have to take a break and we have to move on to the last panel. So, Mustafa and Mahmut, I would like to ask you, for people with disabilities, for elderly, what can we do in order to protect them against the earthquake? And NGOs, we said they were very important. What's your point of view there? How should they improve their work, NGOs? Mustafa Bey. Well, both of these are difficult questions for me, but I will try to answer both of them. For people with disabilities, for the elderly and for children, we need to take very special measures. NGOs are stepping in this area, but first of all, everybody should think about what to do in case of an earthquake in the first 24 hours. Actually, in the first 12 hours, you are not going to get any help from anybody, so you are on your own. You need to know what to do in your own building, in your own neighborhood, and this includes the elderly, the children, and the people with disabilities. Actually, even though our government, our state and AFAD, they have defined general models, everybody has to develop their own specific models. Mahmut Bey? Of course, after an earthquake or after a natural disaster, in the first 3 days, water and food supply cannot be met by the state. It seems to be very difficult. In various countries, the food and water supply can be met by the NGOs. That's why NGOs are indispensable and integral in case of an emergency, in case of a natural disaster. That's why we have conscious and aware and strong NGOs in Turkey, but we need to increase their number. I had said that I was going to allocate 15 minutes for questions and answers. I believe I abided by my time limit. As a moderator and as a manager of an institution, I am going to take initiative here. We are talking about costs, and we are talking about the necessity to change our mentality, to change paradigms, starting from the micro level up until macro level. We need to change our mentality. For example, you touched upon museums. Somebody has to think about museums, somebody has to think about dormitories, others hospitals, schools. Everybody has to think about their houses where they work, so everybody has to work collectively, and this is not going to change over time. We cannot finish this work over time. I would like to congratulate Marmara Union of Municipalities because they touch upon this issue, but this is a very comprehensive and thorough subject. There are many things that have been done so far, but risk mitigation issue. It is very important. We should ask ourselves the following questions. Is my house strong? And secondly, in terms of public transformation, is it done sufficiently or not? We should ask ourselves this question. By the way, Istanbul is the pupil of our eye. We have lived in this city for years. I love this city, but it's not only about Istanbul. There are fault lines in the Aegean region, in the Eastern Anatolia region. Turkey is a country of natural disasters. It's not only about earthquakes. In Düzce, in Trabzon, we had other kinds of natural disasters. So we have to learn how to live with natural disasters. We have to spread the culture of living safely. It starts with wearing your seatbelt. It starts with the prevention of occupational accidents. It's no use looking for someone responsible after an earthquake. You cannot reverse the life losses. So I am aware of the responsibility that we have as managers, But when a person gets sick, you cannot put the blame on the doctor. The doctor has to do whatever he or she can, but they can't reverse the situation. We cannot hear the question because the speaker is not using a microphone. Translators cannot hear the question. Have you measured if the buildings are strong? Have you measured how resilient buildings are done? If you do not do that, you cannot just say, it's a natural disaster, what can we do? It's fate. I have never said that. Excuse me for interrupting you. We have been listening to you for a long time now. What do you think about the settlement, the zoning settlements? Engineers were actually undermined, and there was a permission for illegal settlements. Actually, well, that's not actually what I've said. Well, they say 15,000 people will die. How can we reduce that? Well, even this calculation shows us that you are very far away from a scientific approach. Well, let's agree upon the following. I am representing the state, and I am trying to explain you the situation as sincerely as I can. I am not trying to avoid from my responsibilities, refrain from my responsibilities. This is not what I'm trying to do. I am not saying that individuals have the responsibility and we can't do anything. I am aware of our responsibility to reinforce hospitals, to rebuild schools. I am talking to you, explaining you how there are shortcomings in terms of urban transformation. And when it comes to the permission of settlements, there is a culture coming from our history. There's a reality in front of us. Istanbul has an illegal settlement problem. There are many illegal houses in Istanbul. Many of you, I believe, live in Istanbul, and you know that this was a big problem in Istanbul, and we found a solution to that. The zoning piece, it's not directly related to the earthquake problem. It does not make your building safe against the earthquake if you have this permission. People cannot say that my building is safe now because I have now my zoning permit. This is not what it is. It is something else. Let me repeat this. The main question here, the real question, when are we going to complete the urban transformation process altogether? We have to demolish the old buildings and we have to renew them. I have to close the panel, unfortunately, because our guests are waiting in the back. So governments make political choices and citizens answer to these choices during the elections. But is urban transformation being carried out in the necessary regions or not? Lady, please do not ask me the questions that the government, that the ministries can answer. I am trying to advocate for prevention, risk mitigation when it comes to natural disasters, but we need 100 billion Turkish liras for urban transformation process to be completed, and we do not have that kind of money. Our ministers, our mayors are talking about that all the time, but natural disasters are not controversial. Everybody has to realize their responsibilities. Both the public sector and individuals have things to do, have responsibilities, and we have to be transparent in our efforts. So this risk mitigation efforts, they need to be completed in a successful way, and this cannot happen overnight, but we have to start working now. This requires collective work. I am trying to express my opinion as sincerely as I can. I would like to thank participants for their participation, and I would like to thank our panelists for their speeches. Thank you very much.